on parental leave, and so I am managing them this week. This should be recording now. There should be a little light that says recording. All right, I will start the webinar, and I just need to close this set of slides momentarily and open the other one. It will only be a moment, but I'm guarantee you I'm going to fidget through it for a second for everybody. So just one sec here. Goes there, and then here, and then you hit share, and then you maximize the size of the screen, and then you turn off the transcript button, and that should be correct. Gabe, does that look right? I can see you. Looks good? Awesome. Great. Thanks.
That's great.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for being here. This is the Emerald Ash Borer Awareness Week webinar for 2025 on Don't Move Firewood, social media, message frame testing. The presentation today is going to be split between myself, Lee Greenwood with the Nature Conservancy, and Gabe Baril with University of Wyoming. Normally, like I said, it would also include Laurel Downs, but she's out on leave right now. We're looking forward to seeing her back in a couple months. The Nature Conservancy is the manager of the Don't Move Firewood campaign, and so we're going to dig right into it. So the Don't Move Firewood campaign as a whole is not specific to the emerald ash borer. It's specific to firewood. And firewood is a broad pathway for invasive forest insects and diseases. It can move a wide variety of different forest pests and pathogens. We know that this does happen. Forest pests can and do move when people move firewood. It's well documented. We also know that the regulations on firewood and on forest pests are neither comprehensive across the US and Canada or between the US and Canada, etc., nor are they consistent in any way. So it's a very complex regulatory framework that is confusing. The other thing that's really important to know is that new pest outbreaks come to light every year. Not only new pests, but new outbreaks of pests that we know about. So the environment around outreach is ever changing in a lot of ways, especially if you focus your outreach on the pest situations themselves, because they are always changing. In order to avoid some of the biggest pitfalls to the universe of forest pests and firewood, we really try to stick very closely to our goals. Number one, our goal is to protect trees. It's not to identify forest pests and pathogens. It's not to somehow make an enemy out of firewood. It is to focus on the trees themselves. And the tactic that we're using to focus on trees themselves is this one that we have a lot of experience and ability in, which is slowing the spread of invasive forest pests in this specific firewood-based pathway. The target of this particular tactic are firewood users, so anybody who uses, sells, buys, touches firewood, basically, and stakeholder group educators. Now, a lot of the folks on this webinar are probably in that second group. You may work as a volunteer or a paid employee for an agency or a nonprofit or a firewood distributor or a campground or anybody, and you have an opportunity there to be an educator of the group of firewood users. In order to get our message across, we start with the campaign's name a lot of the time, which is Don't Move Firewood, but Don't Move Firewood doesn't tell you what to do. So we always try to follow our campaign messages with what you should be doing in order to protect trees, to get back up to our goal. What you should be doing is you should be buying firewood where you burn it, or you should be gathering it on site when the landowner permits you to, or you should be buying certified heat-treated firewood where that firewood is available, which is not consistent. So that last one is particularly interesting because in some places it's not a realistic piece of advice for the public. There is not significant or any certified heat-treated firewood available in some parts of the US and Canada. So this is why we really work hard to make sure that we incorporate different regionally appropriate messages to the different stakeholder groups so that folks in an area without significant heat-treated firewood available on the market don't tell everybody to buy a product that basically can't be purchased there. In order to do all of those things, and you just saw the slide if you were on right at the hour, We do our very best as an outreach campaign to make outreach tools consistent and widely available. And most people start at our website where we have our resource library, which contains huge numbers of posters, billboards, stickers, temporary tattoos, advertisements, social media blurbs, you name it, on the resource library, all available for free download. And you can always reach out to us if you're having any trouble with that. We also have a Firewood map, which is for the public to use in order to figure out the rules, regulations, and outreach advisories for every single state and Canadian province. We have invasive species profiles for all major forest pests and pathogens, including a few that don't move on firewood just because we have those for educational purposes, but the vast majority of them are prone to being moved on firewood. We also have a news site, which used to be called our blog, but the name blog kind of went out of style. And we have a newsletter that you can sign up for to get monthly updates on what we're up to and what our partners are up to. We also have a Spanish language microsite. The Spanish language microsite is our 10 most useful and visited sites in Spanish. It is at the URL No Mueva la Leña, which is Don't Move Firewood in Spanish. And so you can get to it either with the English or Spanish URL according to the audience that you're using. And then we have lots of resources made specifically for outreach professionals. Our firewood comparison report is a highly detailed outline of every single state's firewood pest regulation and outreach recommendation conditions systematically. It was just updated as of, I believe, January, possibly February 2025, so it's quite up to date. We highly recommend you use that if you need to do a deep dive. And as part of our resources for outreach professionals, you are here on this website, on this webinar, excuse me. And this webinar is the second of 4 that we are doing for Emerald Ash Borer Awareness Week this week. I mentioned a couple slides back that our goal here is to protect trees. And this is a little bit of an ironic slide. I kind of chuckled as I made it, and I'll get into why. So in order to meet the goal to protect trees, the whole premise of the Don't Move Firewood campaign is to provide outreach to people to change their behavior to do what they're supposed to do. What they're supposed to do are one of those 3 messages that we told you about earlier. Buy firewood near where you burn it, gather firewood on site if you'd prefer to do that, or buy certified heat-treated firewood. Those are the 3 behaviors that we want humans to implement in order to better slow the spread of forest pests. But knowledge does not mean behavior change. If knowledge alone meant behavior change, a lot of us would get more exercise, myself included. That's why I use that one. I know I should probably take more walks, but I don't always do it because there's a lot of barriers in the way of me actually getting enough exercise. That's called essentially the information deficit model, which is to say, if you really believed that you could get me to take more walks, you would just tell me that over and over and over again. But I can tell you right now, it wouldn't work because it wouldn't really fix all the things that are happening in my life to prevent me from taking enough walks. So just knowing what you need to do is not effective all by itself. You also have to have, for instance, a really achievable call to action. And on the internet, believe it or not, everybody on this webinar is super familiar with calls to action. Online calls to action that are most commonly seen that you all can probably really relate to are subscribe, buy now, sign up, click here, and learn more. Those are the most classic online calls to action that you will see. And those are very achievable. You can definitely take that mouse and do one of those things. And in fact, in one of the most influential articles calling out how awareness alone doesn't equal action, as I was taking a screenshot so that you could all see this cool article that I recommend everybody read, the URL for that article is at the bottom, called Stop Raising Awareness Already. They actually have the 2 out of the 5 classic calls to action right on their page. So they have subscribe and sign up right there in red on their website. And it's a great example of how you have an article that's supposed to amusingly raise awareness about not just raising awareness, but also they've got these classical calls to action. So at the same time, if you're totally unaware of a need for an action, you definitely pretty much aren't going to take it. So there is an awareness component to any type of behavior change campaign. It's simply that awareness isn't alone in the wilderness here. You have to achieve the overall goal by coupling awareness with other things. And we do need to start with awareness in a lot of cases, because what we know is that less than half of the public have ever heard or seen any firewood and forest pest related messaging. And in part because not all states have laws, but also definitely because not everybody's heard of the laws. Even less, only 19% of people, when we last were able to poll them, were aware of any state laws or regulations pertaining to the movement of firewood whatsoever. So you've really got a significant awareness deficit that definitely contributes to the lack of behavior change. In case you're wondering who is the most likely person to actually get this message across in a way that will result in behavior change, the answer to that is very clear from our research. It's forestry-related public agencies. It's really important to know that the public doesn't really understand the difference between the different public agencies in a lot of cases. They don't normally really get what the difference is between, say, a state forest employee or a federal forest employee is. It's not very important to them. It's just that it's a forestry-related public person, not a private company, for instance. So the idea that, a private business will be more listened to than a, for instance, Forest Service employee, that is not actually what we found in our polling. The people that are trusted are the people that are perceived to not have a commercial interest in it, so public employees. And then what we know from extensive review of the literature and other examples in other taxonomic groups, in other invasive species educational campaigns, in other social science professionals, is that the most effective messaging when it comes to getting an environmentally themed message across is something that is encouraging, empowering, and brings in a social norm, which is sort of like you might hear a positive peer pressure. Because social norming is sort of a technical term. I like to think of it as like the good part of peer pressure. If all my neighbors are doing good things, I'm more likely to do good things. So I feel encouraged, I feel ready to do it because I'm empowered, and I know it's a good thing and my neighbors are going to do things like that. And then I feel like I should do this desired behavior change. So I need to know what it kind of is. That's the awareness level. I need to trust who's telling me the message in the first place. That's stakeholder groups that are respected and trusted by the public. And then I need the message to be delivered in the way that I'll actually be able to internalize it and then do it, and I'll feel good about doing it. So those are the basics of how you achieve the goals here, in our case, to protect trees. And a lot of these are lined up fairly neatly in the reference at the bottom of the page. Again, you'll be able to find that online if you don't want to type out that very long URL later. So when I mentioned that we have other taxonomic groups and other social science research on messaging, we know that there's a bunch of things that don't work particularly well. And it's very common and not problematic to use figurative language, which a lot of people think about metaphors. There's other types of figurative language, and that's all right. But you can think about mostly metaphors, and they're really common in science communication because complex scientific concepts are really tough to explain briefly. And so people often lean on metaphors to help people relate to the messages, and that's fine. The problem is that some forms of figurative language that have been used in the past or being used now sometimes can distract, be counterproductive, cause misunderstandings, whether in person or in an online forum, and then you're not achieving your goal. So at the top of this slide, I want us all to remember that we have a specific goal of protecting trees, not of just raising awareness or not of just having people see the message. We actually need them to take that message all the way down the whole continuum until they do the behaviors we want, and that protects the trees. Some of the things that we've seen either in the peer-reviewed literature or in our own experience or in partner campaign experience that can cause these misunderstandings and distractions and counterproductive experiences are terms and metaphors and figurative language that invoke wars or battles or military metaphors. These can cause all sorts of unwanted outcomes, including killing native insects just because of misunderstandings. It can distract people because this is a very visceral type of language from the desired behaviors and just completely derail the conversation, whether in person or online. And then you can really upset people. You can really reduce the palatability of a message by bringing in something that makes quite a few people uncomfortable. And then you're not protecting trees because all you've done now is made people tune out because they're not feeling comfortable with the conversation. Similarly, we've seen that excessively nativist, reductionist, which means overly simplified, and fear or scaremongering type messages can have some of the same problems. They can fuel arguments that don't help you get people towards changing their behavior. You can increase people's sensation of social tension, which is the opposite of positive peer norming, right? Peer pressure means you feel part of the group and you want to do what they want to do. Social tension means you feel uncomfortable and you want to leave the group. So that's not getting us closer to our goal. And then just general discomfort. You're not going to trust a message that you're uncomfortable with. So all of this is undermining the peer norming that you need to get people to change their behaviors. And so it's not at all serving your outreach conservation intent. Again, you're not actually protecting the trees. If you want a reference for some of this material, this recent paper by Reeb and Heberling is really great, and I highly recommend it. The URL is at the bottom of this page. So the Don't Move Firewood campaign works really hard to keep up on all of this social science research, messaging, and experience of our peers who work in social science messaging to make sure that we're following the best practices that we believe will serve our goals the best to protect trees. And those are what you see here. We want to use protective frames and objective frames, depending on the circumstances. We don't want to use problematic figurative language that makes things harder for us. So we want to either use the protective frames, which are based on protecting a valuable resource, and that can be emotionally valuable. That's not a monetary value. And then making people feel that they can be the protector and encouraging them to take part in the experience. So examples of that would be how you would protect the places you love, or saying you can help save the trees. Then there's objective frames. So talking about facts that are clear and not overblown or uncomfortable. So for instance, that your choices matter. That's both empowering and fact-based. It's instructive, so you could learn more about how you can be helpful. And again, returning to this idea of having a really clear call to action within your materials so people know what they feel like they should do. All of this is to say that the Don't Move Firewood campaign has a pretty substantial social media portfolio. Right now, we focus most of our attention on Facebook. In the past, we did use Twitter, although that's been less productive lately. And back when we were founded in 2008, we actually had a MySpace account. So some things come and go. We also do post on Instagram, which we found is pretty useful too. Right now, the vast majority of our posts are on Facebook and Instagram, and most of them are what's called in the industry organic, which just means that we didn't pay to put them there. We just literally post them there. But some years our budget allows to include for paid advertising, which on Facebook, which is where we normally do this, comes in two different formats. Either boosted posts, which is like an unpaid post, but you pay Facebook to show it to more people, or advertisements, which are actually labeled much more clearly as a straight up advertisement in the Facebook feed. A/B testing, which is what we're going to get to in just a half a second for anybody who's really waiting, compares two extremely similar posts, in our cases, to see which one performs better over time. So essentially, you're doing a controlled comparison in order to maximize whatever it is you're trying to maximize. And we decided with our advertising budget a while back to test a wide variety of different types of posts over time, where we were controlling the photo and the format, but changing up the message framing. So using this figurative language or non-figurative direct language in order to figure out how to fine tune our social media accounts to get as close to our desired outcomes as possible. And the way that we decided to do this, because we sure weren't going to use the things that we knew are not best practices, like fear mongering or like using war metaphors for firewood behavior. These things don't help you. So what we decided was we're going to do the best things and compare them very carefully in order to see if one performs better than the other. And we decided to compare protective language with objective language. What does that mean? Well, this is what it literally looks like. We had these functionally identical ads with cool bugs because we know from prior experience that cool bug pictures do very well on Facebook. And we would change the wording and run them simultaneously so that one, I just used some descriptive adjectives or descriptive terminology up here, was protective in that it was largely descriptive, and it said that it was ruining fruit in your backyard. We also used grapes because people get a little worked up about the wine industry, and we thought that would be very like, oh, I should protect grapes. So that's a protective message. And then with the same exact photo, we did objective. If this is a more general terminology, we talked about infestation, prevention, contamination. That's kind of scientific. It doesn't have as much of an emotional punch as the terminology used on the left. Now, if you're thinking, gosh, this is kind of subtle, yes, you are correct. We were not attempting to test things that we knew would do badly. We were attempting to test two things that we knew would do fairly well and see if one would do better. So here's how we tested it. We used 30 different ads over the course of about 18 months in 15 separate pairs of ads across 5 different what's called flights, which is really just periods of time, honestly. And then each pair, like I showed you before, had the same photo, the same designated audience, and the same budget of spending the advertising dollar. That money spent and that running time was held the same within each period. And generally speaking, we tried to make each of those flight periods about the same amount of time so that things were as equivalent as we could make them. Facebook does not make this easy, by the way, because Facebook is designed to sell products. Sometimes you're the product, and sometimes the product is shoes or drugs, pharmaceuticals, or whatever. And so it's not easy to make a comparison of educational advertising on Facebook. This actually involved a fair amount of trial and error, as well as, if Laura was here to tell you, quite a bit of frustration. But I think we got some really good results. And then we compared a whole bunch of different metrics that Facebook allows you to compare in order to do our best to really understand what, if any, different performances we could get out of these 2 different types of wording frames. And these are the names of the performances. This is essentially social media metrics speak. So whether or not somebody clicks on links, which links they click on. Is it all of the available clicks or all of the available links? It's a little subtle. Shares is one that people can pretty much understand. So whether or not you shared it with a friend or with another page. Page views is whether or not they go all the way over to the Don't Move Firewood website. And that's going to be important later. Speaking of important later, my partner here, Gabe, is going to talk about the statistical comparison.
Thanks, Lee. Hey, everyone. I almost forgot about MySpace for a sec. So, like Lee said, the goal with these data was to compare our key metrics of interest, like number of page views or shares, link clicks, between the ads that had protective language versus those paired corresponding ads that had objective language. And we achieved this comparison using conditional logistic regression, mainly because this analysis retains the inherent pairing between the different ad types, while also accounting for the fact that certain ad pairs belong to the same flight. because different flights had characteristics like duration that the ads were active was a little bit different. The amount that was spent on that flight was a little bit different. So this analysis ensured that we were comparing basically apples to apples. And that's what's shown in that bottom right figure here. We have these like paired ads, one with protective language, the other with objective language. And we just want to compare the metrics between each pairing while accounting for the fact that certain pairings belong to the same flight. And so statistically, or I guess functionally, what that does is it calculates robust standard errors that are more conservative in the sense that they acknowledge that those pairings within the same flight are not necessarily fully independent samples. And all of these analyses were conducted in program R. So Lee, can we go to the next slide, please? Thanks. So we're just going to look at a small subset of the overall results, but this should give you a general overview of what we found. So this figure, we have the number of page views. So the number of views of Don't Move Firewood's landing page. And we can see on the x-axis that we have ads with objective versus protective language. And so each line on there is representing or connecting each pairing of ads. So the blue color is indicating that ads with protective language had more page views than their corresponding paired ads with objective language. So we can see overall, in general, protective language tended to result in a greater number of page views. And then we'll go to the next slide, please. And we see the basically the opposite trend with click-through rate, where ads with objective language tended to have a higher click-through rate than their corresponding ads with protective language. And so there seemed to be somewhat of an efficiency boost with objective language, or somewhat more engagement within the ad itself, although again the protective language elicited more page views overall. And then we'll hop to the next slide, please. And like Lee was saying about actually sharing these ads with other people, we didn't see any differences in shares. So people actually, sharing the ads on Facebook between ads that had protective versus objective language. But regardless of ad type, we did find something that we thought was worth presenting to you all. So here we have the number of shares on the y-axis and the number of days that each ad was active on the x-axis. And you can see that shares increased if ads were active for longer, which so there didn't seem to be a point at which it wasn't worth continuing to keep an ad running. So hopefully that's helpful information to everyone. And then hop into the next slide. Ads with objective language and ads with protective language both performed well and performed pretty similarly. There were some minor differences here and there, but certainly both produced a lot of engagement on social media. And yeah, so now I will pass it back to Lee to continue the presentation. And yeah, thanks for listening.
Thanks, Gabe, for being our awesome statistical person. I think one of the best things to know is that we found that there are some subtle differences, but they are subtle. Both the protective framework of evoking emotions and the values, whether your value is a tree or a backyard or a wine industry, they did everything compared pretty well. There were some pluses and some minuses, but we didn't actually find massive differences. One of the things I like to think about for this is there's a wide variety of people on this webinar. Right now I see 51 participants, which is awesome. Thank you for coming. Some of you probably work in a space where you'd be more comfortable talking in protective, sort of emotionally invoking languages, talking about the values people have. And then others of you might work for volunteer or professional organizations where sticking to really tight facts is going to be what you need to be. That's the voice of your organization on a website or a social media account. And what we found is both of those things do really well. There's a little bit of an advantage if you want people to go to your website and read more. That's the call to action, right? Read more, learn more in the protective values-based languages. That's good. But on the other hand, the objective, really science-based stuff, got a little more of the engagement that's within the Facebook environment. So enlarging a photo to look at it, hitting the like button, hitting the share button. So there's an element here is with the best practices language here of either protective or objective language, and not any of these figurative language framings that we know can have backfire effects or negative impacts or create people to sort of tune out. If you're avoiding those things, you're going to do pretty well either way, which is great. I mean, as it says in this in bold, similar overall performance is really cool because that means you can do a lot within the space that we're working here. Let me see if I can just go to the next slide. Oh, bonus. We ended up briefly having the ability to do this really fun final comparison where you may recall from the prior example, we always compared two identical photos because we found in many, many other runs that weren't strictly A/B controlled that if that the photo itself drives a crazy amount of difference between different postings. And so we thought, okay, well, we know that different photos have different outcomes. Honestly, that's not very interesting. But, you know, both Laurel and I had sort of laughed through the years about badly drawn cartoons of things and how those sort of pop up in a lot of advertisements. And we thought, well, like, what if we did our own really kind of silly, badly drawn cartoons and asked ourselves, like, what happens then? And instead of changing the words, kept the words the same and did either the nice scientific photo or the badly drawn cartoon. So we did actually a small round of these just to kind of explore what would happen next because we really genuinely had no idea. And what happened next is very funny. The cartoons garnered more attention, but it was often counterproductive attention. People would get obsessed with how they couldn't figure out what the cartoon was, or they were like mistaking the emerald ash borer for a grasshopper, and then something else, like they thought it was a cockroach, and then people would get into weird arguments. And it's a great instructive story as to if you were measuring only engagement or only impressions, which are two online social media metrics, you might think that the cartoons were better. But there is no lesson to be learned to not move firewood from arguing about whether or not something is a cockroach or not. That is not getting you to your goal. So what we discovered was even though the metrics might have been better for the cartoons, there is no way it was actually better for the purposes of the Don't Move Firewood outreach campaign to run the cartoons, which was useful to know. And that is our presentation. We have Gabe, myself, and this blank space, which is where I was going to put our colleague, Tim Campbell. So sorry, Tim. Tim is a specialist in aquatic invasive species and with the Aquatic Nuisance Task Force, and he's done a lot of this really similar work for aquatic species instead of terrestrial, and he's been helping out, and I wanted him here for the Q&A. Tim, why don't you give a better self-introduction for a half a sec, and we'll put your information in the chat.
Yeah, half a second. I hope that I am just the Stop Aquatic Hitchhikers guy, so just a friend of Don't Move Firewood. But I work for University of Wisconsin Sea Grant, do aquatic invasive species, outreach, coordination, and research, and just a lot of connecting states and communities with outreach and program evaluation resources.
That's great.
Happy to be here.
So some of Tim's really cool research that he's done with colleagues is what informed the A/B testing concepts here that we were building off of, and he's been serving as a colleague and advice on how we could frame this and how we could make it more useful and more actionable to different people doing social media outreach. And we hope that this research will be useful not only for Firewood, but of course, for any organization, especially working in invasive species outreach, because we have been, shifting our culture, I would say, for the last 20 years from the awareness model to the real behavior change focus into the better message frames focus and avoiding garnering attention without actually focusing on the long-term goal. And that's some of what we were trying to do here. So now we're open for Q&A. You got statistician, aquatics, and terrestrial gal. So I'm eager to hear if anybody has questions for us. And you can put them in the Q&A, which is great, or the chat. It's kind of your choice. I will do a stop share, but I can bring up a slide if anybody has questions about like the graphs or anything. There you go. Tim, anything exciting having seen us do this presentation for the first time ever? Any take homes from you while people come up with their Q&A?
I mean, obviously great presentation. I should have been thinking harder for a question that I could ask to get it started, but it was really interesting to see, like, I know this was like bonus content, but the drawing versus photo comparison, and I'm busy writing you a side email about it, but I do feel like there's a lot of some space there we could explore, because I know when we were doing our work, I'd have to dig up like the research on it, but at least in the social media world, like the visual is probably the biggest driver of engagement for things. So we spend a lot of time thinking about like the text we're going to write and then throw in a picture. And it's like, well, actually, the picture really drives a lot of what people are clicking on. So just seeing that comparison, I think, is really interesting. And just seeing that you can get a lot of engagement, but it's not always the right engagement.
That's exactly what we saw with the photo versus the cartoon. And that's why all of our A/B tests had identical high quality photos, was because we've seen years of our own post performance is highly dependent on the quality of the photos. Like, we knew if we even changed anything, that's all that you could compare. All right, we got somebody in the Q&A. Thank you for rescuing us from ourselves. Hi, Bia. It's been forever since I saw you on a webinar. It's great to see you. So Bia Nabua Berman is from California, or used to be at least, and she asks, can you expand a bit more on which kind of pictures are best for this? Yeah, so we have not done, for instance, A/B testing between high quality photos, but what we definitely see within our own experience is insects that are very well photographed, and what I would say is eye-catching. So for instance, the glitteriness of adult emerald ash borer, the spotted lanternfly and its flashy red underwing, for something like polyphagus shot-hole borer, which is in California, that Bea might be most interested in. I would say just a really nice glamour shot that kind of accentuates how kind of cute that insect is, because it's brown and not otherwise showy, might be really good. People are not a big fan, quite frankly, of larvae. They think maggot in their head. We don't get good outcomes from larval photos because of that, like, push away social norm. That's gross. I don't like it. So those are the things that we've seen that work really well. Tim, do you have a similar phenomenon in aquatics that you know of?
I feel like I've been doing people stuff enough that I am shifting away from pictures of our species, and am usually, I know this is Emerald Ash Borer Awareness Week, so obviously photos of that make sense, but we do a lot of photos of like people taking the actions that we want, and are really just trying to focus on the positive action, as you said, the positive social norms, and people seeing what we want to have happen. So that's really what I've been thinking of a lot recently.
Yeah, and that gets to the next question that queued up, which is kind of fantastic. So Catherine Schmidt says, so what about photos more aligned with the goal? The trees you want to protect instead of the pests you are against? Absolutely. Great point. That's what Tim was just getting at. We did not test the sort of people first photos in the A/B testing because we've seen generally lower engagement with the people first photos, and we didn't want that to get in the way of the A/B tests, because that would have entered in a whole nother group of variables that could have been just really confusing for the statistics and the ability to pull out a conclusion. But I think both of them are good. And normally, if you've ever followed the Don't Move Firewood social media accounts, we do a fair amount of positive behavior norming, like Tim was getting at. Beautiful trees, people enjoying a camping outing, people chopping firewood. There's, like I said, we're not here to make firewood bad. We're here to make sure people choose the right behaviors with firewood. So we definitely incorporate all those, but we did not work them specifically into this testing framework because we thought it would further confuse the process of testing the messages. Okay, I answered that one. Let's go to the next one. Josh Flatch from Oregon. Hey, Josh. I often include doable actions for the audience: buy local, report pests at hotline, but many invasive species issues are bigger than local. I often throw in contact your representative, so like senator or something, depending on the issue. Have you seen something that suggests how I might do this better? I mean, I think the core here is the value-based framework and the simple thing they should do. And so I think any one of those things would be good, but only do one at a time would be my advice. I don't know, Tim, how do you take that?
That's a good question. I think similarly is like what you're talking about. Like, I feel like you have your prevention actions that I would reference most people to, and if once I knew people were on board with that, or if maybe I were talking to somebody like a lake association leader or a community leader that I already knew was on board with kind of our Stop Aquatic Hitchhikers messaging, then I would give them good advice on a message they could bring to their representatives and elected officials on kind of like specific things that they could be asking for. So kind of doing the same thing for contact somebody, and then giving them specific points to talk about.
Yeah. Now that you say that, I think, to get back to where I was starting about the sort of do's and don'ts, you never want to, unfortunately, you never really want to push somebody too far out of their comfort zone because they're going to stop believing what you say. Even if you're right and it's good, they're still not going to keep believing what you said. And so if you think contacting your representative is something that people will feel, for instance, is uncomfortably political, even if it's not, you wouldn't want to go there because you could potentially lose them for the earlier messages: reporting pests, not moving firewood, stop the clean, drain, dry your boat, that kind of thing. Like, you could lose them before you even get the basics down. So I think, yeah, being tactical with your audience, like Tim said, if you already know that they're like invested in the concept, maybe then you could move to a secondary message, but not overcomplicating things and not layering things that might make people uncomfortable. So that would be my advice there. Thank you, Josh. And then we have Sheila Babbitt. I try to avoid being overly alarmist while still showing that something like emerald ash borer, a spotted lanternfly, is a big deal. Any advice? I think that sounds right. I think my advice is that that's great. Yeah, Tim, how do you guys deal with that with aquatic invasives?
We have been, yeah, sorry, this is like the crux of the issue, right? Because you want to make people care, and it's a big deal, but you don't want to scare them or make the issue seem on par with anything else that's like a really, really big deal, right? Because you might not experience an invasive species issue like right away. Sometimes it's just something you kind of experience over months or years. So we've been trying to really reinforce impact-based language that you describe, like, this is the impact of zebra mussels or starry stonewort or something, and describe what it does to kind of the ecosystem that they care about. And that's usually enough to make people feel that it is a concern without using any kind of figurative language that tries to add to that. Yeah, I think that's the best way I know how to do it without kind of leaning into those figurative language approaches that may or may not always be accurate.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like the overly alarmist um can be a slippery slope into upsetting or turning off people's brains. And that's where you want to just be thoughtful about that. You can tell people that emerald ash borer kills, all the ash trees in a forest. That is true. But you don't want to tell people that it kills, not that you would say this, every tree in America or something, right? Like that would be overly alarmist. And so you have to kind of be like, this will, this will hugely impact your city without being like, it's the end of the world as we know it. And that's a fine line, but I think the core question here is like, how do you draw that fine line? And I think that's really situationally dependent.
And from a behavioral camera freaked out for a second. From a behavioral standpoint, like people need to feel like the actions that they're taking are going to do something and have the ability to impact change. So if it is such a big deal that them cleaning their boats or them not bringing firewood from home like doesn't matter because it's so catastrophic, they're just not going to do the thing. So yeah, I don't know if we helped create a good solution for you, but just trying to walk that fine line of concern without the end of the world is great.
Yeah, we try to lean a lot into like your choices matter because they do. It's true. Like every individual choice here with firewood matters. Every individual, reminder to and then remembering to clean and dry boats. It matters. We know it matters. And so we try to really push that, like what you do matters. And I hope that makes people feel the way that we want them to. Like you could do something about this. What you do matters. So hopefully that works out for everybody. All right. Well, we're a little bit early, which is fantastic. Ain't nothing wrong with finishing with a couple extra minutes to go. Does anybody else have any additional questions? Any statisticians out there want to grill Gabe on R or otherwise want to ask us something that has come up in their mind?
I would like to know what everyone else would like to see have a drawing treatment done to it. So.
Oh, you mean like the like the
for the
spongy
bonus
moth
content.
one?
Yes. So if you have suggestions.
So we did an emerald ash borer one. And then I think an Asian longhorn beetle one. That's one I feel like she said that one got mistaken for a cockroach or something. And then the emerald ash borer got mistaken for a grasshopper, I think. And then the spongy moth. And those were the three we tested because we wanted a couple. But we didn't do anything else. But it was really funny. I just want to say Laurel did the artwork for the cartoons and she intentionally did them like really cheesy with googly eyes. And I just think they came out fantastic. So I highly recommend getting somebody with a good sense of humor to do the cartoons for you. Because the point was they weren't supposed to be perfect. They were supposed to be a little internet wonky, But Tim, I think you should do it with the mussels, and just like because don't mussels have like 1,000 eyes? You could just do like all these little eyes and everything, and
a little feet and bissel threads.
Yeah.
I think we have some good drawings. I think we can lead into. So I will follow up via email on that one.
All right. Well, if I don't see us, in Q&A. Oh my gosh, we got 2 more questions. Fantastic. So number 1, anonymous. How do you address when people don't want to take responsibility and think it's the job of the government to do the work, or people feel like some people are exempt from don't move firewood practices like logging companies? Oh boy, this is a big one. So for the first one, how do you address when people don't want to take responsibility? There's some really good social science that shows as well as political science that shows that there's some people whose minds you will never change. And it is not a productive use of your professional time and money and effort to really, really hit those people whose minds you'll never change, because you'll never change them. So we really aim for the middle, the people who are considering perhaps doing the right thing. So people who are gardeners or tree lovers or hikers who might actually have an affinity for trees. And then we try to change their minds to do the right behaviors. So for instance, how do you address those people is that we strategically don't aim for those people. We aim for the middle where people might actually change their minds. And then people feel like some people are exempt from practices like logging companies. Logging is a totally different industry. And while it's a valid question, the firewood outreach world doesn't really work in the commercial logging and timber supply chain world. Those are largely regulated entities by state and not the same as firewood regulations. So while they're important, they're kind of not within our professional space. We try to really refer questions and comments and concerns about those to the correct professionals that, quite frankly, aren't us. So we really try to keep to our own responsibilities, and logging is not one of the Don't Move Firewood responsibilities. Last but not least, Bea asks about links to the papers. Absolutely. And if you remember at the beginning of the presentation, I mentioned that we will have the PDFs posted for all the slides. And those links are on the PDFs, and I should have those done, if not this week, then next week, right on the Don't Move Firewood website. And so it'll be pretty quick to find them. But if anybody would like to just email me for one that's a hot topic, or Gabe or Tim or Laurel, although don't email Laurel right now, she won't get back to you. We can get you whichever one you're desperate to know the link of, for sure. All right, that's it. Gabe, Tim, thanks so much. It's a pleasure to have everybody on here today. To all the folks who lasted the whole time, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks everyone for tuning in.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
Bye now.
Bye.